Thank you so much, Rachel. Thank you, Biffy. And good morning, everybody. I'm really glad to be able to spend this time with you. And uh, what I want to do is this. It's a chance for us to think about the idea of gratitude and the idea of Thanksgiving. And I do so with really three motivations in mind. First, of course, is we're coming up on the holiday of Thanksgiving. So it's natural for us to gather in this way, gather as a Jewish community and think about the idea of Thanksgiving. How can we potentially weave our Jewish identity into this American holiday, which for many people is their favorite holiday of the year, even as Jews, or I would say potentially, especially as Jews. So that's part one. Part two is the idea that in this moment in time, we're under such stress, such strain, there's such hardship for so many people. Even now, we need to think about the idea of thankfulness, finding blessings. It's something we can work at. It's something that we can cultivate. And then the third is the chance to look a little bit big picture at the value of gratitude in Jewish tradition. So a little bit of Jewish tradition, a little bit of American tradition, and a little bit of this moment in time. As I'm speaking, I would love for there to be questions or comments. For the first part, if you can put them in the chat, and then hopefully we'll have a chance to chat a little bit together. So if I mention something and you need a clarification, or I mentioned something and you want to follow up on it, put it in the chat or give a wave, and we will hopefully get to that towards the end of our time together. So let me start in this way with this idea of gratitude. Classically, Jewish tradition talks about each human being, each one of us, being created with two inclinations, two parts to our being. One of them is called the Yetzer Tov, and the other is called the Yetzer Ra. And it's a familiar expression, I think, to many. Yetzer is one of the words for creation from the creation story at the beginning of Genesis. And the teaching says that each one of us is created with both parts to us. The Yetzer Tov, the so-called good inclination, and the Yetzer Ra, the so-called evil inclination. And it's something we talk a lot about at the High Holy Days on Yom Kippur, but really in many respects throughout the year. Here's what's interesting about the teachings about the good inclination and the evil inclination. There's a Talmud passage that says, and you have to listen carefully to the way it's phrased, the Yetzer Ra is Tov Me'od. So let me translate that just to be clear what we're reading. The Talmud, which is the ancient rabbinic text, the first effort of the rabbis during a time when the world was being turned upside down, when there was such challenge to how we conducted our lives, there was such cloudiness to the future. The rabbis tried to put forth fundamental ideas, not just about how we should conduct ritual, but how we should see ourselves in the world. And so they looked at this idea that God created each one of us from the beginning with a Yetzer Tov, literally a good inclination. Tov is the word for good, and a Yetzer Ra. Ra is the word for evil. We have both of those within us at any time. But the Talmud says the Yetzer Ra is Tov Me'od. The evil inclination is very good, which was the rabbi's way of saying that even though it is the evil inclination and can lead us down destructive paths, it is also the source of things which are really incredibly important. Things like curiosity, ambition, passion, and desire. All of these come from the Yetzer Ra, the so-called evil inclination. In other words, the rabbis are saying it's not really inherently and automatically and completely evil. Rather, it reflects an appetite. It's things like having passion, having drive, and then how do we use them? So the counsel of the rabbis was that we should always work to control and channel this Yetzer Ra, this evil inclination. We can't get rid of it. There are actually legendary stories about attempts to rid the world of the Yetzer Ra, and how it fails because it's that Yetzer Ra, that drive that, as I said, gives us things like passion and ambition and drive and desire. There are even teachings that talk about Yetzer Ra being linked together with our sexual desires, which is not meant to cast that as evil. The rabbis certainly talk about the good and the holy and the beautiful in that, but rather it's this ability and desire to create or to build. And so when it comes to the idea of gratitude, what we face is the need to cultivate it. If the world is hard all around us, if we're being consumed with other feelings all around us, we need to work, and we have the ability to work to control and channel this drive. We have the ability, in other words, to cultivate gratitude. Oftentimes we see this in the way parents think about raising their children. Fundamental questions that we may each ask: how do you create gratitude in your children? How do you make children glad for what we have, create a sense of contentedness, rather than in a sort of dynamic of more, more, more? So I'll share a story. It's from one of my favorite resources in this regard. It's not a brand new book, but it's certainly a very good one. The title of the book is The Blessing of a Skinned Knee. The Blessing of a Skinned Knee. The author's name is Wendy Mogel, Dr. Wendy Mogel, M-O-G-E-L. And again, it's called The Blessing of a Skinned Knee. The subtitle is really revealing about the content. The subtitle is Using Jewish Teachings to Raise Self-Reliant Children. So even if we're not raising children, even if our children are grown, even if we have grandchildren that are grown as well, I think the ideas are really valuable. So let me just share one little anecdote from Dr. Mogel's book. She entitles it The Blessing of Longing, Teaching Your Child an Attitude of Gratitude. So I like the rhyme too, the attitude of gratitude. He who has 100 wants 200, an ancient sage observed. He was probably a parent. 2,000 years ago, the rabbis realized that gratitude, a most essential character trait, does not come naturally, but must be taught to children. They knew it was a tough one. Here's a story that's happened to you. When my daughter Emma was nearing 7, her grandparents sent her a birthday check. Emma wanted a pound puppy playhouse for her birthday. It was the only thing she wanted, and she talked about it with a swooning passion. They didn't have one at our local toy store, so she convinced me to take her to Kmart. The toy aisles were a mess. There were toys on the floor, toys out of the boxes, G.I. Joes in the section with the Barbies, no pound puppy playhouses. We asked for help. An unconcerned clerk shrugged and said, "If it isn't on the shelf." I felt a missionary zeal rising in me. I suggested that we ignore the fast approaching dinner hour, brave the traffic, and head out to Toys R Us. Emma looked at me with both awe and great tenderness. When we arrived, I felt hope rise in me. Nice and neat, an alert salesperson directed us to the pound puppy section. I saw the playhouse right away and wanted it to be the only one. I wanted to have the Holy Grail. I wanted to have found the Holy Grail. Emma sensibly didn't care how many there were, as long as there was one for her. For 3 days, she and the pound puppy playhouse were never apart. She slept with it perched on the foot of her bed. She took it to her dental appointment. But then it was over. The pink plastic case sat on the floor. She now longed for a Backstreet Boys CD. So I think the end of that story, certainly for me as a parent, even though my kids are older now, certainly is something that resonates, that all-consuming passion. I want this, I want this, I want this. And whether it's as parents or grandparents, or whether it's really for ourselves, because we can be guilty of wanting, wanting, wanting too, how do we cultivate that attitude of gratitude? How do we control and channel those passions and those desires? We don't want to get rid of them altogether, for they're a healthy, normal, helpful part of life, how do we cultivate that attitude of gratitude? Classic Judaism has a few different suggestions. One is this exercise. The rabbis urge us to endeavor to recite 100 blessings a day. Now, we're a mixed group. We're from across the community, so we may have different ritual practices among us. But here's what I will tell you about this prescription from the rabbis. They urge us to try and say 100 blessings a day, even if you are diligent with all of the traditional rituals, even if you attend morning, afternoon, and evening worship every day, as is traditional, even if you say the blessings before and after meals, that still will not get you to 100 blessings. So the prescription of the rabbis is really something profound. Certainly, on the one hand, we can't deny or ignore the traditional rituals, but the rabbis are asking us to do something more, to look for opportunities to say blessings. So as a starting point, I would start with some of the traditional blessings. The blessing before a meal, motzi, and the blessing after a meal, birkat hamazon. Both are very good personal rituals that can start us down the path to thankfulness. If we pause before we eat, just for that one sentence, even if we don't say it in the traditional Hebrew, even if we don't recite the full blessing after the meal, but we pause for a moment before we eat to say thank you, how good it is that we have food, to pause for a moment after the meal and give thanks, it's a very powerful beginning. It's what in other realms is called the idea of mindfulness or mindful eating. I'm as guilty as anybody. I can sit down in front of my TV and the hand just keeps going into the bowl and I'm not even thinking about it. I'm not even aware of it. It's mindfulness. Mindfulness is connected so closely to this idea of ritual. So 100 blessings a day, start with some of the traditional ones potentially, but look for other ones as well. Another is the prescription, again, from the rabbis, that what we need to do is slow down and learn to appreciate what's around us. Now, this is, I think, a unique challenge and opportunity during this pandemic time. Under ordinary circumstances, where most of us are out and about all day, every day, slowing down might mean, you know what? Cut back the schedule a little bit, maybe spend a little more time at home, maybe spend a little more time with our partners or our friends. But now we're in this almost ironic situation where we're spending almost too much time in the home, almost too little time out and about in the community. And the slowing down, I think, takes on a different element. So it's finding the silver lining, so to speak, in that opportunity. Whether it's taking walks, not just because we can't do anything else, but because it allows us to appreciate where we are. It's things like the Zoom calls with family or friends and so on. So I think even under current realities, we can still slow down and learn to appreciate what we have. Another is a traditional Jewish value that one way we can give thanks or acknowledge our blessings is through giving. So there's a significant set of Jewish teachings that say giving is a way of acknowledging our blessings, giving tzedakah. And we've all done this, I think, in different ways. We have a simcha in our family, a wedding, a bar mitzvah, what have you. And part of what we do at that moment is we give something to tzedakah. There's a tradition as Shabbat approaches each week, so in a few hours as Shabbat is about to come in, that we give some tzedakah. We give tzedakah in honor of those who have died and all sorts of other moments. But remembering it or turning it just a bit to say this is a way of acknowledging our blessings, not just marking an occasion, but giving thanks. One more in this category of sort of traditional rabbinic ideas about cultivating gratitude. In part, for sure, if we think of it as parents or grandparents, but I think for ourselves too. And it's the idea that we shouldn't say the word need when we mean want. And we can be guilty of that ourselves, certainly in terms of children or grandchildren or students or others that we can help to mentor. Don't say need when you want. Mogul's story about this dollhouse. I need this. You can sort of picture the child saying that. It's not about need, it's about want. Let me pause for just a moment to see if there's a question or comment I can answer. Thank you, Biffy, for putting up the link to the book. Let me just, again, pause for a moment. Is there a question or comment? And then I will continue. Okay. So a second element of Thanksgiving is coming from the traditional prayer service. So as I alluded to, in traditional ritual practice, there are 3 daily prayer services. There's a morning, afternoon, and evening service. That's the case on weekdays as well as on Shabbat and holidays. And the traditional structure of this service revolves around a set of blessings that are known as the Amidah or the Tefillah. The names are used sort of interchangeably. Tefillah literally means prayer, so it's called HaTefillah, the prayer, the central set of prayers in the service. Amidah, from the root word for standing, is another way of saying that these are the most important prayers, and therefore they are traditionally said standing. So in this Amidah, in this Tefillah section of the daily prayers, there's 3 prayers at the beginning and 3 prayers at the end. And then the part in the middle will vary depending on the occasion. 3 at the beginning, 3 at the end. The 3 at the beginning are, number 1, a prayer about our heritage. God is the God of our ancestors. Number 2, a prayer about God's power. And number 3, a prayer about God's holiness. So that's the 3 prayers that begin this primary section of the prayer service. And then the 3 at the end. Again, 3 times a day, every single day of the year. The 3 at the end are a prayer about worship or appropriate service to God, a prayer of thanksgiving, and a prayer for peace. So you hear it right there, woven into the bedrock of the prescription to pray 3 times a day, every day of the year, is that not only we acknowledge sort of our place on the chain of tradition, the idea that we're descended from Sarah and Abraham, the idea that we're in this covenant with a God who is powerful and holy, but 3 times a day, every single day of the year, we're prescribed to have a prayer for Thanksgiving. And so it's that important an idea. The traditional rendition of this prayer says, we acknowledge with thanks that you are our God and the God of our ancestors forever. You are the rock of our lives and the shield of our salvation in every generation. So part of the prayer for Thanksgiving is those 2 elements. Acknowledging that we're in a relationship with God. God is the rock and the shield. God gives us strength. God gives us protection. It's a complex and nuanced theology that could certainly warrant a full treatment of its own, not just an element of another subject. But when we think about this idea of thankfulness, there's these 2 components. We're not alone. We're in a relationship, a covenant. We're part of a people that continues on generation to generation. And number one, we have something we can hold on to. God is our rock. And number two, we can find protection or solace or comfort, and God is our shield. So that is the very traditional version of the prayer. There are many alternative creative renditions of the prayer, and I want to spend just a few moments on some of the creative alternatives because they could potentially be meaningful in personal practice, even if we don't adopt the traditional 3 times a day recitation of the Amidah in its full form. So an alternative version of the Thanksgiving prayer. God of goodness, we give thanks for the gift of life, wonder beyond words, for the awareness of soul, our light within, for the world around us so filled with beauty, for the richness of the earth which day by day sustains us. For all these and more, we offer thanks. So a takeoff on this prescription that 3 times a day we should give thanks. God of goodness, we give thanks for the gift of life, for the awareness of soul, for the world around us, for the richness of the earth. For all this and more, we give thanks. We offer thanks. 3 times a day if you do that, or once a day if you do that, it is a very it has great potential. There's another way that we can do this, which is part of the morning rituals. So we could, in a sense, spend some time talking about how we are when we first wake up in the morning, but that might be too much to reveal in this setting. So, the alarm goes off or the birds start chirping or whatever it is that brings us awake in the morning. How are we right in those first few minutes? Before we've showered, before we've gotten the first cup of coffee, some people jump out of bed and they are bright-eyed and ready to go. Other people start much slower. Some people need some time alone, and other people are much quicker to be able to engage with others. The rabbis are aware of this. The tradition is very aware of this, and there is a Thanksgiving component to waking up in the morning. It's a blessing that begins moda or modeh ani. The grammar just changes by gender. Moda or modeh ani lefanecha. I stand before you, God, in thanksgiving. So whether we're the sleepyhead or whether we're the early bird, whether we need that coffee or whether we somehow just have it within, that's idiosyncratic. That's personal. That's not a significant element of this idea. Rather, it's one of the things we can cultivate, one of the things we can discipline ourselves to do as we begin our day is to say, Moda or Modeh ani lefanecha, I am searching for, I'm finding thanksgiving in this beginning of the day. And so it's another element as well. And I would say that it can be done in a creative fashion. It doesn't have to be bound by the traditional ritual. So Sheila asks a great question about whether or not Israel has a Thanksgiving Day. The simple answer to that question is no. Israel doesn't have a Thanksgiving Day the way we do in the US with our Thanksgiving Day. There is some interesting overlap between Sukkot and Thanksgiving. So the way that Sukkot is observed in Israel, of course, but for all of us, in many respects, Sukkot can be seen as a Thanksgiving Day. There's also, for the Hebrew speakers in the group, there's a very bad play on words, because the word for Thanksgiving is hoda'ah. The word for turkey in Hebrew is hodu. So Yom Hodu can be taken as Thanksgiving Day or Turkey Day. So it's a bad sort of bilingual play on words. So that isn't really an answer to Sheila's question, but it came to mind when she asked the question.
That's a great question, because I feel like it's like most, I think, like many cultures have like a designated day of like that. And so Sukkot is about that, but also like Shabbat has this piece of Thanksgiving every week. And so maybe that's like a reason why I don't this is just like I'm wondering question, like it's so part of the Jewish slash Israeli by default culture, this concept of Thanksgiving, that perhaps there isn't like an extra dedicated day. Just a thought.
Yeah, no, it's a great thought. Thank you, Rachel. And I think that if I were to speculate, I think it probably in large part has to do with I'll say the Jewish foundation of the state of Israel. I don't want to delve into some of the realities of modern Israel, but the Jewish foundation of the state of Israel means that the idea of Thanksgiving, as we've been looking at for the last little bit, is sort of woven into Israel. So while not every Jew in Israel is traditional in their religious observance, these more universal ideas that you give thanks by saying Modeh Ani when you wake up in the morning, you give thanks with the prayer in the Amidah, or you give thanks with the 100 blessings idea, or Sukkot, or Shabbat, and so on. Yeah, I think that's probably why there's not a designated Thanksgiving Day. We all know the American history, of course, of why we have an American Thanksgiving. It really wasn't some ethical idea that we should pause and give thanks. It was really this historical event surrounding the Europeans coming to America. And then it became popular because we liked the chance to come together and give thanks. There was a question from Gina about songs of Thanksgiving. So there are two that come to mind. From a traditional perspective, there are some wonderful melodies for the psalm that begins Hodu Ladonai Ki Tov, give thanks to God. So that is certainly one where, from a traditional perspective, you can weave that in. The other is a children's song, actually, which begins, thank you for my mommy, thank you for my dad. And it continues on from there. So it's a very simple, sweet melody. If you have young children or grandchildren, it can be a nice choice because it is really encouraging. It's a popular song in Tat Shabbat setting, so it's not some hidden secret that I'm sharing. One more element, unless there's another comment or question, which I would certainly welcome. So we are coming into American Thanksgiving, to our Thanksgiving holiday, less than a week now. We all recognize, of course, the needed restrictions, the challenges that we face because of health concerns, that we're not able to travel, we're not able to welcome guests into our home in the same way. And it probably doesn't need repeating, but I think it's important enough to repeat that we need to respect this. We need to listen to the doctors who have urged us to do this, as hard as it is, as challenging as it is to not be together. I think it is still very important to do. That doesn't mean that we can't have a Thanksgiving. We can't take advantage of technology or other things to still mark the day or mark the season. But I think from a Jewish perspective, there are some other pieces that we can weave in. So number one is the Motzi and Birkat Hamazon. I mentioned them earlier in part of this idea of cultivating gratitude. And it's this unique intersection of being Jewish Americans, that as we sit down at the Thanksgiving table, one of the things that we can do is say Motzi. And there's an important aspect to that blessing. Motzi isn't just a blessing that says, thank you for the food, or thank you for the meal. Motzi is structured in a very particular way. Motzi says, Hamotzi lechem min haaretz. Blessed is God who brings forth bread from the earth. And if we think about that blessing, it's almost counterintuitive in the way that it is expressed, except it has an important value in that formulation. Bread doesn't grow from the earth. The ingredients grow from the earth, the wheat, the whatever other ingredients we have. And we human beings take those ingredients and make them into the bread. So the blessing of motzi, which we can weave into our Thanksgiving, is a way of making it a Jewish Thanksgiving, is to give thanks not just for the food, but for the partnership we have with God. That we're not just saying thank you for the food, we're saying we're aware that there was a whole series of events, a whole sequence of events that led to that plate of food in front of us. So we can give thanks for partnership with God. We can give thanks for the farmers. We can give thanks for the grocers. We can give thanks for the delivery men and women, all those steps along the process that led to the food getting onto our plate. And that's, I think, the subtext of the blessing of motzi, which doesn't say, blessed is God who brings forth corn from the earth. It's thank you, God, for the partnership, for our ability to work and create, and for all those steps along the way. So motzi, I'll call it motzi plus. Thank you for the food. Thank you for the farmers. Thank you for the grocers, and so on and so on. That whole supply chain that led to what we have on our plate. Birkat Hamazon, the parallel blessing after the meal, has a very interesting nuance to it as well. I think an interesting and important value. So Birkat Hamazon, the blessing for after the meal, is rooted in a verse in the Torah, in the book of Deuteronomy, that says, we should eat and we should be satisfied and we should give thanks to God. And that verse is recited as part of the traditional grace after meals, the traditional Birkat Hamazon. And think about that sort of step by step prescription. We should eat. We got that part. We should be satisfied. That doesn't just mean we should have enough food on our plate and have enough food on our plate. That's a blessing. And that can go back to the idea of expressing gratitude by giving. So give tzedakah as part of Thanksgiving because we know that not everybody has enough food. But where does satisfaction come from? It's not just about the quantity of the food. It's about taking that step back, taking that breath, and cultivating an attitude of thankfulness. So you may have an overflowing plate, you may have a small plate, you may have food that you love or food that, you know what, didn't turn out so great. And remember that this blessing isn't just for Shabbat and holidays. It's not just for special occasions. Traditionally, the rabbis say these blessings of Motzi and Birkat Hamazon should be said every time we eat. So it may be that simple grab and go breakfast or the cup of soup we have for a weekday lunch. It's about cultivating the attitude of satisfaction. It's about finding satisfaction in what we have. It's about tempering that desire for more and eating, finding satisfaction, and blessing God. I will also mention, it's not our principal consideration today, but this is also an important element of responding to those who have eating disorders. That when someone suffers from an eating disorder, whether it's we ourselves or loved ones, it's not about the quantity of food. It's not even about the quality of the food. It's about our attitude and our relationship to food. And that is, I think, again, the subtext of this traditional blessing, which says, eat and be satisfied. How can we accomplish that? At the Thanksgiving table, making it a Jewish Thanksgiving, start with motzi and start with Birkat Hamazon. Another thing Jewishly we can do for Thanksgiving, it's a bit of a challenge in this particular year, is volunteering. Just as we give tzedakah as a way of channeling our desires and acknowledging our blessings. Volunteering can certainly be the case as well. So recognizing that there's a lot that isn't happening right now, that's still something I think to keep in the mix. One other piece I will mention, some of you may be aware that Rochester is home to the oldest interfaith Thanksgiving service in America. This is the 149th year that the service has been existing, continuing, and it will happen this year. It's going to happen on Zoom. It is a collaborative effort of 12 or 15 different houses of worship, Jewish, Christian, Catholic, Muslim, all together. We're weaving in some more secular traditions, Native American traditions as well. There's certainly more work to be done even in the future, but I would encourage you to consider this as part of your Thanksgiving as well. The service will be on Zoom. If anybody hasn't received the link elsewhere through one of the synagogue emails, certainly can feel free to send a message to info@tbk.org, and we'll be happy to send you the link. Just send a quick one-sentence message that says, may I have the link for the Thanksgiving service? It's 11 a.m. on Thanksgiving morning. It is also a tradition that is unique because many cities, many communities that have Thanksgiving services, they do them at other times, but Rochester service has always been on Thanksgiving Day. So thank you, Biffy, for listing the email address. If you don't have the link already, everyone is invited. Share it with others. We are doing it on Zoom this year. We have a wonderful speaker and a number of great elements to the service. So that's, I think, something else that we can do. The last thing I wanted to raise in this regard, and Biffy, I'm going to put you to work one more time, which is there was an article published a couple of years ago, and it talked about Jewish prayers for Thanksgiving. And these are above and beyond the kinds of things that I've mentioned. So you can access the article at jewishboston.com/ and then the words, are there Jewish prayers for Thanksgiving, with a hyphen between each of those words. jewishboston.com/ are there Jewish prayers for Thanksgiving, with a hyphen between each word. R-there-Jewish- and so on. And then a slash at the end. And what you'll see there is some other creative ideas. Like I mentioned, the creative Thanksgiving prayer that I shared earlier, the ways to adapt and focus on the nuance of motzi in its full formulation and Birkat Hamazon in its full formulation. There's another set of resources. There's several prayers that are suggested there. And it's another way to say that, yes, Biffy, it looks correct. Without clicking on it, it does look correct. Are there Jewish prayers for Thanksgiving, with the slashes between each one? I think you might need a slash at the very end after the word Thanksgiving. If it doesn't go through, that would be the only thing from the way I have it listed. So I will say to everybody how nice it is to have Rachel and Biffy's help. I speak and things just appear, and I just show up and everything is taken care of. So I'm very grateful for both Rachel and Biffy, and I thank you both for your leadership in not only this, but in so many different ways. So
Biffy is an amazing Zoom driver. She did it all summer. She has so much expertise.
It's great. Now I appreciate both of you. So let me pause there. We are coming up on our 45-minute mark, and I know the schedule is very full for the morning. So I'd love to hear questions or thoughts. If there are other things that I can offer, I'd be happy to do that.
Um, does anyone have any questions, thoughts, comments? You can take yourself off mute and you can speak or put it in the chat. Biffy just
Uh,
included the correct link now.
yeah. As everybody's thinking, the only other thing I will mention is I didn't talk about food specifically. I mean, I alluded to it, but that is certainly another way of cultivating thankfulness is with our choices of foods, whether it's foods that are organic or otherwise good for the earth, foods that come from places that treat workers properly. These are all other things that are very much in keeping with Jewish values and priorities. So there's lots of potential in that arena as well. To think about the foods and how do they impact on the earth? How do they impact on the farmers or the factory workers and so on? There was a effort launched a number of years ago. It came originally out of the conservative movement to create what was called a Heksher Tzedek. So a Heksher is a stamp, a kosher stamp. Any kosher food will have a Heksher on it. And the desire was to create a Heksher Tzedek, which said they are certifying the justice process that led to that food in terms of fair treatment of workers and so on. So I didn't mention it specifically, but certainly as we plan menus and whatnot, it's another way to cultivate thankfulness.
I love that. That's a really often I think we miss that last piece, the last part that you said, and it's really important to think about. And it's kind of hard to figure that out sometimes, like the trail of how your food gets to you. I think that is Truad. Do they have a process with that too? What was it used to be the it's led by Rabbi Jill Jacobs. I think they have something with that as well.
True, yeah, True has also done some work in terms of this concept of where does the food on our plates come from.
Yeah.
There are also companies that do fair trade. There's fair trade coffee, fair trade chocolate. The fair trade companies have also done work for the Jewish community in terms of things like Hanukkah gelt and Pesach treats as well. So the fair trade movement has a way of advancing it. True as a good option. Heksher Tzedek through the United Synagogue is another possibility as well. And then even sort of simpler things like the farmers markets locally that are a way of saying, you know what, this isn't a food that is going to be harmful to the earth because they're coming from small farms and they're not being shipped and flown and all that good stuff. So that's certainly another avenue potentially to pursue. Are there any questions, comments?
Rabbi Stein, thank you so much for your time and your wisdom this morning.